Welcome to this explainer. I am so excited to dive into this one with you today. We are looking at the Battle of Fort Sumter, a ticking clock. This is the story of one of the most dramatic, incredibly claustrophobic, and consequential sieges in American history. It's not just a story about cannons firing. It's about a desperate standoff on an artificial island, a single spark that ignited a 4-year inferno. So let's jump right in and set the stage for how the American Civil War actually began.
To really grasp this, we have to start with what might be one of the most staggering contradictions in all of military history. Think about the number 650,000. That is the devastating human toll, the number of lives lost during the entirety of the Civil War, along with millions of dollars in damage and a nation completely torn apart. But then look at the other side of that equation. Zero. Zero combat casualties during the battle that started the whole thing. That's right, a 34-hour bombardment with heavy artillery, and not a single soldier on either side was killed in action. So how on earth does a war that deadly begin with a battle so seemingly bloodless? Well, let's find out.
Section 1. The Charleston Harbor Standoff.
Picture this. It's late 1860. South Carolina has just seceded, and tensions are absolutely at a boiling point. To understand how this standoff started, we have to look at the desperate maneuvers of Union Major Robert Anderson. Anderson and his men were originally stationed at Fort Moultrie, but that position had become completely untenable. It was poorly maintained, and sand dunes had literally piled up so high they reached the top of the fort's walls. An attacking force could have just strolled right over those dunes and taken the fort from anywhere. So, on the night of December 26th, under the cover of darkness, Anderson secretly packed up and moved his command across the harbor to Fort Sumter. But here's the catch. Fort Sumter was unfinished because of budget cuts, and it was sitting on an artificial island built right on top of a sandbar.
By making that move, Major Anderson basically walked right into a tactical nightmare. His Union force wasn't even a full fighting unit. He had exactly 85 men. But get this, 43 of them were just construction workers, and another 8 were musicians. Sumter was actually designed to hold 650 soldiers. Anderson had a tiny fraction of that, with his supplies dwindling fast. And to make matters worse, Sumter was built to defend Charleston from a naval attack, which meant its 60 low-tier guns faced outward toward the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, the Confederates didn't just sit back. They quickly seized a whole ring of forts surrounding Sumter, plus a captured federal arsenal. They were armed to the teeth, and all those heavy guns were pointed directly inward, right at Anderson's tiny, hungry garrison.
Moving on to Section 2, a ticking clock.
The isolation these men faced wasn't just physical, it was total. In early January, there was an attempt to resupply the fort using an unarmed merchant ship called the Star of the West, but Confederate guns fired on it, forcing it to turn right back around. Right after that, the South Carolina governor demanded immediate surrender, which the president completely ignored. This meant Anderson's men were trapped. For months, they were surviving on half rations, literally starving while politicians miles away argued over their fate. Fast forward to April, and newly inaugurated President Abraham Lincoln alerts the South Carolina governor that he is sending a fleet, but with provisions only. No reinforcements, no weapons. The Confederacy, however, rejected this entirely. The fuse was officially lit.
Now we get into this incredibly tense, hour-by-hour countdown between Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard and Major Anderson. On April 11th, Beauregard sends delegates demanding surrender. Anderson refuses. At 1 a.m. on the 12th, the Confederates offer to hold their fire if Anderson will just give them a firm evacuation date. Anderson replies he'll leave by the 15th, unless he gets official orders or new supplies. Well, that wasn't good enough. At 3:20 a.m., the delegates deliver a final, chilling message. They will open fire in exactly 1 hour. And exactly as promised, at 4:30 a.m. from Fort Johnson, a 10-inch mortar is fired. That single shot arcs through the dark sky over Charleston Harbor and signals the beginning of the American Civil War.
Section 3. The 34-hour bombardment. Once it started, it was just a compounding disaster for the men inside Fort Sumter. Confederate batteries were firing continuously in this massive counterclockwise circle, dropping shells every 2 minutes. Anderson actually waited until 7 a.m. to even return fire, just trying to conserve his critically low ammunition. And to protect his men, he restricted them to the lowest-tier guns where they'd be safe from overhead fire. The problem, though? Those lowest-tier guns couldn't elevate high enough to actually do any damage to the Confederate forts. Meanwhile, Confederate shells are crashing over the walls, igniting the wooden barracks inside. So Anderson's men are trapped inside a burning building on an island, dodging non-stop artillery. Honestly, the only thing that stopped the fort from burning to the ground was a perfectly timed rainstorm on the night of the 12th. And, as if dodging shells and fighting fires wasn't enough, imagine the psychological toll of this next detail. Relief ships actually arrived on the afternoon of April 12th. Anderson's men could likely see them right out there in the Atlantic, but the ships were completely unable to approach the fort because of that heavy, continuous Confederate fire. Deliverance was right there, literally in plain sight, but completely out of reach.
Which brings us to Section 4, a strange surrender.
The sheer absurdity of this moment peaked around 1 p.m. on April 13th. Sumter is on fire again, the rations are entirely gone, and the main flagpole has literally been shot down. And suddenly, emerging through the smoke, comes this guy. Historian Alan Taylor describes him perfectly. A beefy civilian in a frock coat, a red silk sash, and a top hat, clambering right through the rubble. This was former Senator Louis Wigfall. He had commandeered a small boat, 1 soldier, and 3 enslaved men to row him out into a literal war zone, wildly waving a white handkerchief tied to the tip of his sword. You honestly can't make this stuff up.
Well, Wigfall's little stunt caused a massive diplomatic headache. He strolls in, praises Anderson, and negotiates terms for an evacuation. But here's the thing, he had zero authorization from General Beauregard to do any of this. He just wanted the glory. So Wigfall leaves, and Anderson hoists Wigfall's white handkerchief up a flagpole. Shortly after, the actual official delegates from Charleston show up. They see the flag, but they know absolutely nothing about Wigfall's visit. They reject the word evacuate, demand a formal surrender, and threaten to just start shooting all over again. Thankfully, General Beauregard intervenes, honors the white flag, and allows for that gentler term, evacuation. Finally, at 2:30 p.m. on April 13th, Anderson capitulates.
Finally, Section 5, Sparks of a Long War.
So remember at the beginning when I said there were 0 combat casualties? That is entirely true, but there was bloodshed at Fort Sumter, and it happened in the most tragically ironic way you could imagine. Part of the agreed evacuation terms allowed Anderson a 100-gun salute to the United States flag before lowering it, but as they reached the 50th shot, a stray spark ignited some exposed gunpowder cartridges, causing a massive explosion. The blast mortally wounded Privates Daniel Huff and Edward Galloway. They became the very first casualties of the American Civil War, accidental deaths occurring after the battle had already officially ended. They immediately stopped the salute at 50, lowered the flag, and the surviving Union men sailed for New York.
When news of the battle spread, the reactions were immediate, and they were fierce on both sides. It's fascinating to look impartially at how this single event radicalized both the North and the South. In the North, the attack heavily galvanized Yankee patriotism. Major Anderson became an overnight national hero, and that very flag he took from Sumter became this powerful symbol paraded at massive rallies in New York. Meanwhile, in the South, the victory stimulated immense Confederate nationalism. General Beauregard was hailed as a gallant hero who took the fort and sent the Yankees packing. Crowds danced around bonfires, lighting fireworks to celebrate the win. What's so striking here is that both sides looked at this mostly bloodless 34-hour standoff and felt totally validated. They both foolishly believed the other side was weak, they both firmly believed God was on their side, and that the coming war would be wrapped up in a few quick weeks.
I want to leave you with one final thought. Exactly 4 years later, to the day, April 14th, 1865, a now-retired Robert Anderson returned to Fort Sumter. He came back to those battered, ruined walls to raise the exact same flag he had lowered back in 1861. But what was the true cost of the 4 years in between? What started as a localized standoff with 0 combat deaths escalated into a sprawling, continent-wide conflict that left 650,000 Americans dead. A quick victory turned into an agonizing 4-year ordeal that forever changed the nation. How does a fire that starts so small consume so much? Think about that as you reflect on the Battle of Fort Sumter. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I will see you next time.